I'm Jeanette Cruz, and welcome to Behind the Filter, a digital show that peels back the layers of social media to reveal the raw and unfiltered lives of people. We're about community, authenticity, vulnerability, transparency, and encouragement. Now stay tuned for today's episode. Hello. Welcome to another episode of Behind the Filter. I'm Jeanette Cruz, your host and creator, and today I am super excited because we're going to do not something a little bit different, but I just wanted a little bit more of a focus because this episode will actually launch like right before Hispanic Heritage Month starts to take place, right in like the middle of September. So I'm so happy that you're here. So this is Carolina Castoreno, and she is the Director of Operations and Programming for the Indiana Latino Expo. So thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
I'm excited to talk about all the things with you, just about your background in general, and you know how you're able to connect with so many people here in the community of Indianapolis when it comes to our Hispanic culture and all of that. So before we get into it, I just want to say a quick special thank you to this episode's sponsor, which is Estadio Nightclub. And Estadio has my heart. I do have to say, they're a special group of friends of mine. It is to me, I mean, again, I might be a little bit biased, but it's like the ultimate premier place for Latin nightlife when it comes here to Indianapolis. They're located on the north side of Indianapolis in Castleton. So when you go there, Fridays and Saturdays, they play it all. So we do reggaeton, like salsa, merengue, cumbias, bachata, like you name it. They do it. We have resident DJs there. We also have some DJs that fly in from all over the United States, which is kind of nice. So we get a little taste of everything. They do concerts, events. I think there's even they both hosted a couple of Zumba classes there, which seems kind of nice, which I've never been able to make.
I haven't made it yet, but I keep seeing them, so I need to make it.
Because I'm always teaching fitness classes. Then the last thing I want to do is go to another class.
Right.
Even though I want to do it, I can't go to do it. So eventually, at some point, I will go do that. But you can find more information out about Estadio because you can also do private events there and take reservations for having like your own little sections throughout the week and the weekend. But you can check all that information out at our blog post for this episode, which is going to be at JohnetteCruz.com. All right, let's get into it.
Let's do this.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask you questions.
Okay.
Just kind of go all blindly here. So are you originally from Indianapolis? What's your little story?
So I am from Indiana. I mean, I claim Indianapolis, but I actually grew up in Frankfort, Indiana, which was very hard.
Where's Frankfort?
All my Frankfurt people are like, wait a minute. Okay. It's about 45 minutes north of here, like on the way to Lafayette. So I really grew up in Frankfurt and Lafayette.
Okay.
I'm one of those who was born in a small town, but I've been like an urban city person my entire life.
Gotcha.
So it was never my thing. But we did have a very tight-knit Mexican community there. So like my family was one of we joke around and say like the founding 5 families. So my grandparents moved there in the late 60s, early 70s.
Okay.
And my family actually opened up the first Mexican grocery store in central Indiana.
Really?
Back in the 70s. It was called El Cerrito because we were in the barrio of this little town, and there was a little hill across the street. So that's why they called it that. And it was started off as a grocery store, and then by the time in the 90s, when I was old enough to work, I started working there for my dad from the time I was 12 until I finished high school and moved off to college. And so my family has this huge footprint there. So even though growing up in a small town can be really hard, we were kind of at the center of the Latino community there. So I always did, have a place. It's just I needed to move beyond that and expand.
That's nice. I always say, because I always joke around a little bit, because I'm not originally from here. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and all my family's from New York and Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
And so when I hopped around a little bit around the U.S., and then when I first moved out here, my ex-husband, out of all places, is from Greenwood, Indiana.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I first come out here, super long time ago. I'll be showing my age. But I literally called my mom, and I think I've said this in previous episodes, I called my mom crying because I went to Greenwood. And so here I am, I've lived in Vegas. I went to high school in San Diego and Chula Vista, more closer to Tijuana. So, so much diversity.
Yeah.
And then I go to, out of all places, I go to Greenwood, and I literally call my mom. I'm like, Mom,
yeah,
there's just white people in cornfields. I don't know what to do with myself. And she's just like, Not to tell you.
It's hard. It's hard, and like the majority of my family is from Texas. So my family, I'm actually an enrolled citizen of the Lipan Apache Tribe of Texas. My family is Apache, and then my family in Mexico is Mescalero Apache and Purépecha descent. So my family is like indigenous.
Awesome.
So I also grew up with like even within the Latino community, like another layer of that. So the majority of my family's from Texas. My family's been in Texas since before the colonizers arrived. But what was interesting about like this little town, like here in Indiana, is that every single friend I grew up with, all of our families were from Texas, because why most of our families ended up here was because of the migrant work.
Yeah.
So they ended up settling here. So I grew up with like nothing but Tejano Mexican culture, even though I was in Indiana. But then I moved to Lafayette, and then I moved to Atlanta, of all places. And I was there for 6 years before I decided to come back, to go back to school.
Okay.
And because I had children, and so I was like, I wanted to at least be somewhat close to families. But I was like, I can't ever live in a small town again. So it's Indianapolis, and I moved to Indianapolis in 2012. And aside from 1 year in Miami, I've been here since.
Okay, gotcha. So was that work-related in order to go to Atlanta?
No, my sister had moved there because my sister's also like me, and she was like, I don't want to stay in this small town. And she had started at Purdue, I had started, and then I had my first son my freshman year, so took a very long break from school. And she just like one day was like, I'm moving to Atlanta. And then she like, after my second son was born, she was like, move down here with me. And so I lived there for about 6 years. And it was okay. I did like it, but it was like also like, I don't know if this is for me. It just, the Latino community wasn't as big as what I was used to because I had grown up coming here all the time, going to Chicago once a month my whole life. So I'm used to those communities.
Right.
And I was like, I don't know. And for going back to school, I need to be around community and I need to be around people. And so that's what I did. And then I did move after graduating from IUPUI in 2016. I went to FIU for grad school. I was starting a PhD program in Miami. But again, at that time, it was so hard to live in Miami. I was recently married. My ex-husband was like just from Cuba, got here from Cuba. So he didn't have like a really great job. And then my kids were younger. And it is very hard to live in Miami when you don't have a lot of money. I was only, TAing at the university. So after a year, I had a job offer up here at the American Indian Center to be the executive director. So I moved back.
Gotcha.
And I've been here since. But now I'm okay. I'm divorced and like happily divorced, and also like not a broke college student anymore. So now I'm in Miami like every 2 months, and I enjoy it now.
Now it's like totally different.
Yeah, like I like it now, but yeah. So I've been around and I love to travel a lot. So
awesome.
But I do love our community here in Indianapolis.
So most of your family, are they now still back in Texas, or are all of them still in the area where you grew up?
So my dad still lives in the area where I grew up, and so does my brother. My sister's down in Atlanta. My mom splits her time, so she's actually up here for now. She comes up and stays in the summers, and then as soon as it starts getting cold, she goes back to Georgia and stays with my sister until summertime again.
Right.
And so, but then like the majority of my extended family is all in Texas. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
So.
It sounds like your family has always been pretty close.
Pretty close, yeah. We're a huge family on my dad's side, and so because my grandfather, this is not that far removed, but my grandfather was the youngest of 20 kids.
My gosh!
Like there are so many of us in Texas. It's crazy. I'm like, I almost like never want to date somebody from Texas. I'm like,
my gosh!
related to me.
You run into somebody that's like your second, third cousin.
I know. I'm like, the chances of you being related to me are too high.
Yeah. Oh wow.
Yeah. So there's a lot of us. There's a lot.
Wow, that's so crazy. My family's like completely opposite. We're not that big at all. Gosh.
Yeah, my immediate family is pretty tight. It's my sister, myself, my brother. That's it. But lots and lots of cousins.
So after you kind of hopped around to different places and ended up here in Indianapolis, what did you see as terms of like a difference in terms of way of life? Obviously, Miami is totally different. I feel like you can't really compare anywhere to Miami in terms of way of living and that stuff. Yeah. But how did you feel about making that move back here?
So at first I was like, because like I definitely don't like winters, and there's a part of me that's like, I'm gonna make my way back eventually, or if I can just get myself situated to where I can do what my mom does and just be gone in the winters, I'll be fine. But it actually was kind of comforting because what I have learned from being doing community work for like the past 20 years here in Indianapolis is that we have a really great community here. And so one thing that was different about Miami, as diverse as it is, there's hardly any Mexicans. So, and I'm used to being around all kinds of Latinos. You know, I'm used to being around a lot of Caribeños and people from Centro America. And my family has always helped, immigrant families out from all different areas. So I'm used to the different cultures, the different dialects. So that wasn't a difficult part. But not having any Mexican influence, there's like no Mexican grocery stores in Miami. Yeah. So I had to drive all the way to Homestead to buy tortillas, which was like, I was like calling my mom and dad. I'm like, can you send me a care package? And my dad's like, yeah, ponte a hacer los de mano, niña. And I'm like, Dad, I ain't got time for that. I'm in grad school, you know? And so it was like, that was a little jarring, not having any of my cultural influence when I'm used to up here, we're the majority of the Latinos. But the other thing is that as diverse as Miami is, it's kind of segregated. So like, Colombians might live in an area, but Cubans might live in another area, and Central Americans live in another because they all don't get along for political reasons. And then it's the same thing with the Black community, where Black Americans might not get along with Haitians, who might not get along with Jamaicans.
Isn't that so crazy? It is mind-boggling to me, because I think people think that we all get along, which you would hope that we would, but they're same thing when I grew up in San Diego, because for the most part I was in San Diego for like my elementary, my middle school, and my high school, and so there's lots of Mexicans, but there was also Filipinos, and then a couple of Puerto Ricans, not very many, and so they would always think that like all of us would be, but like no, it's like we're together, but then we have these little pockets of separation.
And it was very jarring for me, because I'm used to here, I feel like probably because Indianapolis is great. Indiana,
right?
You know, there's a lot of racism, and I dealt with a lot of racism growing 100%. Up. And so I think that people of color here kind of do a better job of sticking together and collaborating. Because I always grew up going to Black and Brown get downs, and like, you know, I grew up as much on Mexican music and reggaeton as much as I did hip hop. Like I wrote a whole thesis in high school about my love for hip hop and everything, you know, so I came from this community where we're always working together, very grassroots, and then everybody being segregated even within our diasporas. So it was a little difficult. And then a lot of people in Miami call themselves Hispanic, and I do not identify with that word at all, because my family's indigenous. You know, and like, I know what people always throw this in my face. They're like, you have green eyes, you have to have Spanish ancestry. No, I actually don't. My mom, the mixed side is from my mom's side, and my mom has Scottish ancestry. Yeah. But I don't have Spanish ancestry. Like on my genealogy, there's no Spanish ancestors that we found going back hundreds of years. Like my family's indigenous, and we've always spoken our language, practiced our culture, you know, that kind of thing, done our ceremonies. I've known since birth that I was, you know, Apache Indy woman. And so so for me, I don't identify as Hispanic. Like I speak Spanish, but I'm not Hispanic. I'm okay with Latina, because I realize that even as an indigenous person, I have a lot in common, like with my fellow Latinos, Afro-Latinos, you know, we have a common bond there. Yeah, so I'm okay with like being under that umbrella, but so, and people over there in Miami, I would be grading papers, and it would be like a sociology project, and they would say, growing up in a Hispanic house, and I'm like, not like a Mexican house, a Guatemalan house, or like, et cetera, et cetera. They were like a Hispanic. I'm like, what is a Hispanic house? Like, what does that mean, you know? So it's like, it's at the same time segregated, but then also a little homogenizing. And so I still love Miami for the culture and the diversity. But yeah, that was something that like coming back to Indianapolis, and I was like, I'm going back to Indiana, but I'm like, hey, I'm going back to community also, and getting back to the thing that I love, which is working together with people from marginalized groups and working for the common goal.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I do agree with you on, like, it's just so funny how other groups, like, recognize you, or they think they recognize you in that certain way. And so for me, like, yes, I'm a lighter skinned Latina, okay? Right. But I'm full Puerto Rican. Right. So, I do have the light eyes. And so sometimes, like, when I first moved out here, I would just get these really weird remarks, and I think people just didn't know how to respond to me. Yeah. Because I looked white, but I wasn't. And so then they would just not know how to, like, approach me and say things, or they would say something that was really, really, like, off-putting, and I'd be like, why the hell would you say something like that in front of me? Just just stupid things. Like if I said I was Latina or whatever, then they would say, oh, well, you speak really well.
Oh, gosh, I hate that one.
Why would you say that? I'm an American. Like, what?
I literally speak better English than the majority of Americans who
Thank
say
you.
stuff like that.
Thank
I'm
you.
just like, okay, like you speak very well for someone who's might be illiterate. No,
So it's so weird. I've gotten both ends of the spectrum of like coming to Indiana and then being like more in a suburb part where the population is more white and it's not diverse at all, and getting like these weird remarks. And then I've also got the opposite end where they're like, oh, you're Latina, you look white because I don't look Mexican.
Right.
And so I've gotten both, but I've gotten that my whole entire life just because like half my family is super dark. And then I was the one who just got the light eyes and the light coloring. Like, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, you know? and that was also something navigating growing up because I've never been able to pass as white and never wanted to, but like never passed as it. But then I feel like people only bring it up, and really it's not even people from my community. Like, I hardly have ever had somebody who's like Latino or Indigenous have an issue with my looks. Like I have a very stereotypical Apache face, like features. I really do. It's literally just my green eyes, I think. But I never had that experience, and so I don't really have a mixed experience either. Mm-hmm. And so I think sometimes people want me to acknowledge that, and I'm like, but I didn't grow up with a white culture, or like my mother didn't even know about her Scottish ancestry until she was like in her 40s, you know. So for me, it was like, I don't get this part of it. I grew up raised culturally as an Apache and Mexican person. That's all I know, and that's all that it was. I was reminded every day of my life growing up that I was not white. Yeah. So it's like for people like of course I'll say, hey, I have a mixed background. Like my dad's side is full, but you know, like I'll have a mixed background, but that's not part of my identity. Yeah. And that's something that I try really hard in my work to do is talk about how we have those hard conversations about identity and understand that like ultimately your lived experience is what makes you who you are.
Oh, absolutely.
So that's what matters the most.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah. Because even so, when I moved, so we were in New York. I was actually born in Brooklyn. I was the first generation born into the States, and then we moved out to San Diego. And so for some reason, when we moved away from my family, my mom just kind of like stopped speaking Spanish to me. Mm. And it was because she just wanted me to learn English. She didn't want me to, and which I found now. Being an adult, I find that really weird. Yeah. But she just always spoke English to me. The only time, I always say the only time, like, I would start to understand is, like, if she's on the phone, like basically, like, gossiping, you know? Right, doing the cheese man. Yeah, exactly. And what she's chatting, like, with the family, then I'd be like, okay, what are they saying? And then so I would still start to pick it up. And so then I'd also get, like, move out to, or for the summers would go to Puerto Rico, and then I'd visit my family, and then I'd be around it, and then I'd be fine. And then, like, but then when I came here, like I've been out here now for over 20 years. And so for over 20 years, I really didn't have any Latina friends. Girl, because you were in the suburbs. I know, like, I know it.
That's one of the reasons too why when I left Atlanta, my sister always wanted us to live together, and she's a suburb type person. I'm like, absolutely not. Like I'm not saying I gotta live in the hood still because like which I have obviously, but I'm like I have to be urban. So it's like I live on the north side. My kids, well, both of them have graduated now, so I'm done with that. But but my kids were in Washington Township, and I'm like I want Washington Township. It's still predominantly black and brown, nice neighborhood, and as close to, you know, without going to the suburbs, it's like, so
and unfortunately, like, because I was married, I'm now divorced as well, but like I was in the suburbs and I moved to the north side for a couple of years, moved back down to the south side because my son still goes to school on the south side, but now I finally have grown where I do have culture around.
Now you know where to go.
I know now where to go. Yeah. But it's just so funny because now it's like I understand it. I can hear it. I can write it. I listen to my music and everything. But then sometimes when I sit there, I'm like, wait, how do I say that back?
That's how my siblings are.
They're like, oh, well, you're not really Latina if you can't really speak it that way. And I'm like, please.
No, we love our no sabos.
We love our no sabos. I know I'm a no sabo, but it's fine.
That's how my siblings are because, like, I actually spent I'm the middle child, so I was neglected. So I spent way more time with my grandparents than I did with my parents. Well, not than I did with my parents, but more than my siblings did. So my grandmother, she was born in Guanajuato, Mexico in 1920. And so when she came over here, she was... very big about helping other immigrant families, and like that's what she was known for. So like in my little town, literally when she passed away, they had all of these like little things made that said La Madrina de Frankfurt, because my grandmother literally was the person, she was half of the town's godmother. Like all the Latino families would go to her to baptize their kids. She's the reason why they got a Spanish-speaking priest in there permanently. Like before, I remember, and I'm not religious now. I grew up with both my Apache culture and Catholicism, and now as an adult, I only practice my indigenous spirituality because of what we have been through as indigenous people. So I don't deal with organized religion. But at the time, I used to go. I would spend half the day in the garden, like with my grandfather, and being told like traditional stories and learning traditional ways. And then I'd go to misa with my grandma in Spanish. But it was crazy because when I was little, we only got to go to Spanish Mass like once a month because they would have to bring someone in to do Spanish Mass. And so we had to go to English Mass. And then it was my grandmother who, petitioned the diocese to get a Spanish-speaking priest, and now it's a permanent fixture. They always have to have a Spanish-speaking priest there. Yeah, so she was a huge figure. So I grew up from like the time I could read and write, going to appointments with her to interpret, translating documents, helping with immigration cases, like taking, helping people at doctor's appointments, lawyers' appointments. I started helping people in school when new families would come in. So that was like something that was instilled in me at a very young age. First of all, be proud of your culture, speak your language, but also, give back to your community. So I knew very young that I was going to be in community work. I knew that was what was for me.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, you mentioned your spiritual background.
Yeah.
I'm so into spirituality. So I'm just curious, like what do you practice? Like what does your culture say about all of that, about what you do?
Yeah, so I'm very much more of an agnostic spiritualist because I'm just like I'm basically about humanity and all that, but with reverence to my ancestors. So like I don't necessarily believe in a deity or things like that, but we believe in the power of like we come from the earth is our mother, in that sense that all life stems from the earth. And then also like I believe in my ancestors, and really that like not necessarily a heaven or a hell, but that the spirit world is parallel to us, so that like the influence of our ancestors is like always there with us. And that we believe in like communal reciprocity. So like just as the earth gives life to us, we are to take care of her in return, and just as our ancestors are guiding us, we are also to like do the work to honor them, which is one of the reasons why it was important for me to leave Christianity behind, because the only reason any indigenous person or any person of color in the world for that matter believes in that is because of colonialism. And so it's like I feel like my duty to my ancestors who survived that is to make sure that I am honoring their way of living and their way of believing. Because many of them, like my grandfather was traditional, because he maintained that. But my grandmother, was removed from her family. Her father killed her mother when she was 5 years old, and so she was forced to go to the convent, and had an amazing story, which I am actually writing a book about my grandmother's life story because it's incredible. But as a result of that, she lost her culture and was indoctrinated and colonized into being Catholic and, nationalist Mexican, as opposed to her Purépecha roots where her family was from, in Guanajuato and Michoacán. So for me, that's like, some people are like, don't you think your grandmother would be disappointed now that she's gone, that because, I was the good little Catholic girl growing up, and, always she made my outfits so I could be the Virgen de Guadalupe in all the plays every year and like all of that. And I'm like, I don't think she would be. I think actually she would be proud that I'm living in my truth and I'm able to reclaim something for her that she lost. So, and that's what I would like to believe anyway. So for me, it's more about this very, reciprocal nature of how we interact, not only with the earth, with our ancestors, but also like everyone around us. And like, it's not about what you can get out of someone. It's about like what you're doing for your community before you think about yourself and the ego.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that. That's amazing. You. Have you, because I know obviously within the Latino community, I mean, a lot of everybody's Catholic. And that's what they believe, and that is it. Have you had any kind of like judgment because you practice differently than other people?
From some family members, yes. I feel like
because I know that it can get
Yeah.
touchy with family members if you stray.
I actually have a very interesting story about that, but right before I say that, I will say I think I get more pushback from like the evangelicals. I think because with Catholicism, not general Catholicism, but Latino Catholicism specifically, has a lot of our indigenous influences syncretized into it, because when the Spaniards, in the Caribbean, it was try to exterminate as many as you can. Yeah. Although I still work with a lot of Taino people who are from Boriquen, Puerto Rico, Quisqueya, which is the Dominican Republic and Haiti, and then also Cuba. So like they still exist. This narrative that they aren't there is very false, but they are very diminished in numbers. And so by the time they got to the mainland, they're like, oh wow, we can't exterminate all of them. So we've got to indoctrinate them. We've got to force them into our way of life. And so that's like where the Virgen de Guadalupe comes in from. It was their way of taking Tonantzin, which was the Nahuatl goddess, earth goddess, and saying, oh, this is actually an apparition of our Mary, Mother of God, and that's how they were able to colonize and force a lot of the indigenous people to accept that religion. So I still have kind of a reverence for it, because even though I don't believe in the Bible or that ideology, there is a ritualistic nature to Latino Catholicism, and the reverence for saints ties directly to our reverence for our deities and indigenous cultures in Mexico, and so for me and other parts of Latin America too. So I can jive with them a little bit better, and for the most part, people are understanding, because I'm very like eloquent when I explain. I'm very thorough about how I explain, why this is the right path for me. And I'm always here to open that door for people who want to connect to their roots and learn a different way. But I'm also going to be accepting that, colonization is a hell of a thing. And so it's here. And however people have to find peace is how they find it. But yeah, I think the evangelical crowd has a bigger issue with me, because I know I dated a guy one time, and I was like, okay, just as long as we don't talk about religion, we'll be fine. And then he came over to my house one day and saw my ofrenda for Dia de los Muertos and was like, "Esos son de demonios." I'm like, okay, bro, we need to have a conversation. And I need you out my house right now. So it's like, I think that's the bigger issue. But with my family, so my dad's siblings who are here, they're actually not his full siblings, so, because neither one of my grandparents, both my grandparents were married before they met each other. My grandfather was my grandmother's love of her life, which is probably why she treated my dad differently, and, I was her consentida. Everybody, all my family knows that, and I feel bad. I love you, cousins, but everybody knows that I was my grandma's favorite. And so, so she would, buy me gifts at, Christmas time, and not my cousins, and my mom would even say, Connie, you can't be doing that. The kids they're going to hate my kids. And she's like, I don't care, But she loved all her grandkids. But I think because she was in love with my grandfather and not her first husband, it was, because that was an arrangement kind of thing in Mexico. And so, you feel a little bit differently sometimes, so that became obvious. But as a result, my tias who are here, some of them I get along with very well, and then there's a couple of them where I don't think we will ever speak again in life because of the differences. They're very whitewashed. I have an aunt who. She married a white man, which is fine, but she doesn't go by her birth name. She goes by an English version of her name. I'm trying not to call her out here, because I know what her name is on her birth certificate, which is not even the name that we called her growing up. So it's so when I called her that in public, she got very mad and called my dad and said I was disrespectful. But she's uber Catholic, Republican, and I remember during the election between Hillary and Trump, which, mind you, I'm a far leftist. I wasn't going for either one of them. But she went on one of my cousin's pages and was like, if you don't vote for Trump, you're going to hell. And I'm like, it's so, because of abortion. I'm like, I promise you Trump has paid for abortions before, but whatever. But she was going on and on berating them. And then they were like, but what about immigrants? That, Grandma, when she first came to this country, she was an immigrant. Right. And she made in the comments, my mother came with a passport, and I had to step in because I was like, oh my God, that's a lie. My grandmother used to literally tell us the stories of how when she crossed the river, she tied her kids to her skirt so that as she was holding them, they wouldn't accidentally float away. I'm like, does that sound like somebody who came with documentation? Wow. And it's and it was very hurtful to me because of how passionate my grandmother was about helping immigrant families, that I would not want her being lied about. So that became a huge riff for me and my family. But it was also like comment
That's
after.
kind of like demeaning like all the work your family has done.
That's how I feel.
You know?
That's how I feel, and it was just like very insulting to her legacy. Mind you, my grandmother like donated and voted for Democratic causes her whole life, and even as a Catholic, you know, like because for her, community was the biggest thing for her, and the people, and knowing who like shows up for your people and things like that. And so yeah, so I would get the comments about politics, about religion. Like, I think she showed up to my second son's baby shower and was like, now that you have 2 children out of wedlock, don't you think you should get married? And I was like, I think you should worry about, you know, like infidelity in your family and not worry about me because I'm good over here. So it was like, so there definitely are people who have tried to make me feel some type of way about that. But at the end of the day, I know that this was the right path for me, and raising my children with those choices, and that they've grown up and made the same choices for themselves. I knew that it was the right way, and it's the way to like maintain our culture and keep it surviving.
Absolutely, I love that. That's great, because even for me, like I'm more conservative, and I do believe in Jesus, and I do consider myself a Christian, but I also have a connection with my ancestors.
Of course.
With where I come from. And so I have been digging into all of that, and I have found out a lot of things about my family and my ancestry. And I want to be able to connect with them because I know there's a lineage there for a reason.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
There's things spiritually that have happened to me within the last few years that makes me take a step back and kind of see the world a little differently in terms of, you know, what has happened with just organized religion in general.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's so funny. It's just like I now see. Well, I already saw the judgment to begin with when I first came here, and just being just a general Latina who got saved when she was 23, but then all of a sudden had to like adhere to like other people. And so I went through this space where like I felt like I had to please everybody.
Yeah.
So, you know, here's Johnette saved, went way over here, okay?
Right.
So then I lost who the hell this person was right here. So now I'm kind of like making my way back a little bit, but then also opening my eyes and seeing it, and then realizing that like, why did I not embrace, or decided for that span of time to not embrace what my culture has practiced for so long, because of other people in their ways were telling me that it was wrong or it was not right, and I shouldn't believe any of that stuff, when I know damn well the things that I have gone through in the last 2 or 3 years is absolutely 100% true in my spiritual realm. And so I am going to honor that, and I'm going to continue and do the work with my ancestries. And like I may believe different than you, but you are not going to judge me for what I'm doing.
Exactly, and that's beautiful, because it's so difficult, I feel like, in this day and age, which is why I used to be very aggressive about it and like, no, everyone needs to decolonize, and we don't need the white man's religion, we don't need the white man's this. And now I've kind of like, okay, I do understand that everybody, you have to meet people where they're at. Yeah. And everybody's like on a different spot on that journey, because I have had friends like that who would, you know, all of a sudden be into the church and they went super far that way. But then as they're finding their stuff, they're like, well, you know what? I still might believe in aspects of this, of the church. Exactly. But I also think there's something else there. And like, I'm all for that, because it should be an individualized experience, whatever it is, whether you believe in a deity or whether you believe in a realm or a spiritual, whatever the case is, that needs to be an individual experience. And I think that's one of the reasons, like, why with Catholicism, they don't bother me as much as some of the others, is because one thing I will give it is I was taught in Catholic Church to pray in private. Yeah. And so I respect that, as opposed to like proselytizing and trying to get people into, you know, like, let everybody find their own way. Like, you know, if they come to church, they come to church, and if they don't, they don't. And so, I think that's like beautiful when people start examining, and it doesn't matter whether it's something that I believe in or not. It's what works for them. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. We're gonna have to not have another conversation. Sure. I've just gotten so into like learning what my ancestors have done, and especially on my mother's side, that like I am like in it, and I'm researching, and I'm doing all of these things, and I'm just like, it is such a beautiful thing to see what they all have done, and so what I am supposed to do in terms of my path, right, for how that comes. And I know that doesn't jive well with some people that are, I would say, not in my circle. I would say around the perimeter. Yeah,
like there's a Venn diagram. They may cross over a little bit.
And I'm just like, it is what it is. Like, you
Yeah.
know, that's what I'm gonna go back to, and I know that I'm going in the right direction because
That's
I've
beautiful.
been from one end, and I'm coming back to the other. And so
Yeah.
now I get to, because my mom didn't know very much, and so I started, you know, diving in a little bit. So now I'm educating her on everything, and she's kind of like, holy crap, I didn't know our family did all of that. And
Right. It's beautiful. It's
I
like
know,
it's a great
is.
journey even within itself. And I do a lot of that. Like I'm on TikTok sometimes. TikTok is annoying, but it's also fun. But
Yeah.
like within like the Native community, like we have these conversations all the time because I'm someone who has always advocated for Latinos to connect to their Native roots
Yes.
and to identify racially correct, because this is one of the things that irritates my soul, is that because we are labeled Hispanic, we're labeled as white, when the majority of us are not white.
Right.
And there's a reason for that. And this is another reason why I don't use the term Hispanic, because it was introduced into the U.S. lexicon specifically to whitewash us. So, you know, prior, everybody just had their own, like, identity, whether it was, like, you know, of Mexican descent, of Peruvian descent, of Puerto Rican descent, et cetera.
Yeah.
So everybody knows about Brown versus Board of Education in 1954 that desegregated schools in America, but the precedent that helped, you know, get Brown versus Board of Education passed was actually a case from 1946, 1947, which was the Sylvia Mendez versus Westminster case in California. And it was Mexican-American families going and suing the school board because their children were being barred from white schools. And so that being passed is what set the precedent for Brown versus Board of Education, but they were very specific in their ruling, and even though they granted it, if you dive into the reasoning, they wanted to be very careful to not let that lead to mass desegregation across the country. So they specifically said, we will now label them as Hispanic, because Hispanic means from Spain, which means white. And so for me, the entire reason why we use the word Hispanic, because people are like, it means you come from a Spanish-speaking country. I'm like, that's what they say now, but that's not the reason why the word is used. And so the entire intention for it was to whitewash brown people from Mexico and other parts of Latin America who were trying to get into these schools to be able to have equal resources as the white children. And so for me, that's very problematic, because to this day, if you get pulled over and you get a ticket and you're Latino, they mark white as your race, even though you can, and they do this to Afro-Latinos. I had a friend who is Afro-Cuban, was pulled over, received a ticket. He showed me his ticket because he doesn't speak English. And it had a W on there, and I'm like, he's black.
Oh my gosh.
How can you guys do this? I also have a client of mine when I was the director at the American Indian Center. She's full-blood Lakota Indian from Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. When she was arrested because she looks Latina, they wrote down Hispanic, and she's American Indian racially.
Wow.
So this is one of the things I've been advocating for years, is for us to be able to racially identify correctly. So during the 2020 census, I was working with people to, you know, don't just mark yourself as other, don't mark yourself as white racially. Like, if you don't feel that you're white, then you can put Native racially. But this has also led to a bigger issue. Because when I was growing up, people would be like, ay, la India. And even though I wasn't even as dark as some of them, but because they knew my family was indigenous and practiced our culture. And I'm like, ¿a poco no son indios también? Like, you guys aren't indigenous also? Like,
right.
But they didn't know their roots. So it was something that was weird for me growing up. And, like, you know, I benefited from the fact that I knew who I am. But the reality is that indigenous people, you know, are oppressed still in Latin America at the hands of the mestizo class and the ruling class. And so now we see where people didn't want to claim to be Indian. Now a lot of Chicanos and other Latinos are wanting to do that, but they're wanting to jump right and say, I'm indigenous. And there's a difference between being indigenous and being of Native descent or racially Native. And I'm having a hard time with that, wanting to help people decolonize or deconstruct these colonial concepts, but also, like, you can't just jump to being indigenous, because what makes someone indigenous, it's a global term. What makes someone indigenous is the community that you come from that has an uninterrupted connection that dates back prior to colonialism. So that means you have to know who you come from. You can't just be like, I'm Mexican, therefore I'm Aztec. Nobody called themselves the Aztec. They didn't even call themselves Mexica. They called themselves Nahua, and they still exist today. And there are so many other tribes, or pueblos originarios in Mexico and throughout Latin America, that they're not all just the same thing. So we have a lot of people who are like, I'm brown, or I did DNA test, this must mean I'm indigenous. Now, it means you're probably racially native.
Right.
But you have to know what your community is. You can't just say I'm indigenous. And so now I'm contending with that, wanting to help people, but also getting pushback because they'll say, you're a gatekeeper. But I'm like, gatekeeping is literally how we've survived hundreds of years of colonialism.
Yeah.
We have to protect our cultures and our people. And the fact that people who are born outside of Latin America, but within the diaspora, don't understand racial dynamics in their home countries often. So a lot of people who are Mexican American and have never been to Mexico don't understand that the mestizo class doesn't necessarily mean you're mixed. It just means you're of that class structure, because it's become, on the caste system, more about class than it is about race. Those people, no matter how dark you are, still benefit and receive benefits from the oppression that is being enacted on the pueblo originarios, who maintain their language, who maintain their community, and are still fighting for land rights and water rights, and dying at an earthly rate. And it's the same thing throughout Latin America. And then they also don't necessarily understand the concept of anti-blackness, and I deal with that with a lot of people who are from the Caribbean, but not from the Caribbean. They're from here, so like Puerto Rican Americans, Cuban Americans, Dominican Americans. They're like, we don't have race in the Caribbean. We're all Puerto Rican, or we're all this. And I'm like, no.
You know, there's a lot of it.
I've been to Cuba. I stayed in Cuba for a significant amount of time. Like, nope, that's not true. And so we have to be able to look past that U.S. lens, because even though we're Latino, we have to understand that we need to learn from the people who are actually coming from these countries and have those lived experiences that we don't.
Wow.
Yeah.
I find all of this so freaking fascinating. I could probably listen to you talk for hours.
Oh my God, thank you.
No, it's just it's so much good content and good information, because even as me, I don't know half of this crap that you're talking about. Yeah. But it's all so good. We all need to be educated in all of that, because none of us are. And I think that's the reason, because we're not educated in it. And then right away you want to toughen up and try to defend who you are.
And it's intentional that we don't know about it. It's not like a conspiracy. The education system in this country fails us over and over.
100%.
We saw every time something happens, for instance, the issue with the Olympics and the Algerian boxer, and I'm like, you guys genuinely believe? Well, first people are like, what is she doing with testosterone in her body at all? And I'm like, so you didn't pass the junior high biology exam, because every human has testosterone.
Oh my God.
And so I'm
it was
angry all the
driving
time.
me crazy, because we had the conversation. He asked me if I watched the Olympics. I'm like, no, I just see all the shit
I catch the
social
bad
media.
Yeah.
But then as I'm seeing people banter and argue, then I'm like, wait, did people are they just talking out of their asses, or are they actually doing their homework and research and finding out
of course not,
who this person is, what's their background, why is she late, what is wrong with you people?
It's I don't know why in this country we take such pride in being monolingual, and then also not understanding global politics or issues, because I was like, let's set aside the whole testosterone thing and the syndrome that she has. You guys think that Algeria, which is 99% Sunni Muslim, was going to allow, where transitioning is illegal, was going to allow a transgender person to represent
the country?
But people,
are you joking?
But I promise you, the majority of these people don't even know what continent Algeria is on. And that's part of the issue, is that we have taken some sort of pride in ignorance in this country. And I don't say ignorance in a negative way, but not being literally not being aware 100%. Of other issues. And that's one of the things that I very much strive for. And I think I used to be, again, way more aggressive about it. And now I'm trying to do that, meet people where they're at. And then again, sometimes it'll still get to the point where someone pushes my buttons to the point where I'm like, okay, you're just stupid. Yeah. And I can't anymore. But I try. I do always try first.
I'm the same way. I always tell people, I am not a black or white person. I'm very gray. I see things from multiple lenses, and I kind of sit back and I take it all in, and then I want to ask questions, and then I'm a slow processor, so then I'll sit and I'll just process shit. But then, if it hits, then I'm like, I will go off.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know? So there's, so kind of like the same thing. So
I always joke with people, because people will say, you think you're never wrong. Well, first of all, I'm a Capricorn, and but I'm like, second of all, I you know what? I never am wrong, technically, because if I'm not 100% sure about a topic, I'm not speaking on it until I have done my research. And so, I mean, of course, I'm not always right, but I'm like, that's why I'm never technically wrong. Because I'm going to do my homework first.
Because I'm the same way. Like, I'm not going to speak on something I'm not educated on. So I'd rather just stay quiet because I'm going to say something wrong.
Exactly. Like,
so
let me dissect it. Let me figure out what my sources are. What do I need to go to before I speak on this? And that's what I try to always do. And I mean, not always successful, but for the most part, I am.
Oh, I just love all of this. Thanks for sharing all of that. So now, so you have all of this amazing like education and background, so you're using it towards the communities here in Indianapolis. So when did you, tell me a little bit about the Indiana Latino Expo, and so how does that work? Are there multiple people that work within the organization? What's your like primary goal throughout the year when the expo is not actually happening?
Yeah, sure. So I actually, January 1 is when I started my position with the Expo. So previously, like I said, I was the executive director of the American Indian Center of Indiana for 6 years, and I was looking for something new. And the Expo came into my lap. So right now, the staff, it consists of myself and Zikri Williams, who is our executive director. So she and I started around the same time, or at the same time we did. So we were both like announced at the gala in December, and then we started our positions in January. And we're a really great team. Like, one thing that I think both of us have been very much focused on is how do we increase our footprint in the community? How do we build trust? And how do we like just expand what we're doing? Like to just take this organization forward, but also like finding these opportunities for our community. And so that's what the Expo really is about. Like, we do have the Expo, which is on September 7th this year. And I'm really excited because of where we're having it at the old Lafayette Square Mall, which I think is perfect location-wise. Number one, in the heart of Latino community. Like, there's so many Latinos living in that area. We get to have as many food trucks lined up as we want, because that was an issue they had last year when it was at the fairgrounds. There's always issues with food vendors going to the fairgrounds and like what you have to get approved and being limited. Also, it means free parking, which you don't get at the fairgrounds. So like, I think that this is going to be a really successful one. We have quite a few consulates who have already signed up to attend, so people will be able to go in and talk to representatives from their home country about like getting appointments or getting documents that they need. And then obviously having all the health resources, education resources. We'll have entertainment as well. So really excited about that. But yeah, throughout the year, we're also focused on other initiatives, which is about creating those opportunities for the Latino community, and also being able to connect with the outside community and educating them about our people. And so some of the programs we have are like the Access Leadership Program is amazing, and I have been so honored to serve on that leadership team, where we are, each year we select a new cohort of young Latino professionals in Indiana, mostly in Indianapolis, but people from outside of Indianapolis are welcome to apply as well. And from ages 21 to 28, so we're getting them, like fresh out of college, still in college, people who are beginning their professional careers. And it's really just a way to get them to network, develop some professional skills, also just kind of getting more out there. They're getting experience as far as like civic engagement, how to network, how to manage finances, how to honor your culture in the line of work that you're doing. How do we create more access for more people like us to get into these spaces? And so it's been a really great program, and we only have a few sessions left for this cohort, and they are an amazing group of people. We've got 28 cohort members right now. They'll be graduating in October, and we're going to start right away with another cohort. So applications will be going live on that soon. You can follow our website for that. And then we have the Mayor's Breakfast, which is coming up next week on the 14th. And what's really great, again, I feel like Zikri and I are a great team. We've been able to utilize our combined experience in these different fields to really amp up what we're doing with the organization. And so like last year, I think they had 2 mayors. We have 13 confirmed this year from around Indiana. We've got a great panel that's going to happen with 3 different mayors. We have Mayor Joe Hogsett will be there, of course, and then we have a keynote speaker, Joel Martinez from the Latino Leadership Institute, who will be talking. We're going to have some really great statistics on Latino demographics, who are some of our first Latinos in different offices, like elected offices throughout Indiana. So it's going to be really great, and that's an excellent opportunity for people from our community and Latino communities all around Indiana to come and hear their mayors, but also have the mayors hear them. And like, how can our communities be more involved with the Latino people? How can they see us more of as a value? What we bring to the table economically, culturally, the unification that we have amongst ourselves. And we're working on developing more programming for next year. Then we also have like my favorite, which is the media aspects that we do. So Salud Mami has been really great. I've really enjoyed that this year. So on that, I produce and then kind of direct and coordinate everything with it. But then I also have a segment on the show, which is basically community engagement, but it's called Comunidad Saludable. And so for my segment, I focus on interviewing people who represent various organizations in the community, whether it be, nonprofits, schools, other types of institutions that are serving Latinos, or even grassroots groups, to really hear from them what are the type of services that they're offering Latinos, but also what's their story, and how have these either Latino organizations or organizations that primarily serve Latinos been able to grow and expand. And so I've had some really great guests on the show this year. Really looking forward to next year having more people involved. Some of the other segments we have general health, mental health, civic health, which is basically civic and legislative engagement. We have emprendimiento, which is entrepreneurship, and belleza, beauty, and then financial health. I think that's all of them. I was like trying to think. And then we also have like la receta saludable, our healthy recipe, at the end of every show. And we do special edition segments occasionally if I'm not able to get somebody booked for that particular show, but somebody's got something really great going on in the community, we'll do a special edition segment that airs like on our social media. So like most recently, I interviewed the Immigrant Welcome Center. They weren't going to be able to, by the time the show would be airing next month, one of their events would already be taking place. So I interviewed them for a special edition that we're going to air next week, so that people can know about what the events they have coming up in September that are going to be really helpful to immigrant families to attend, to help on their cases or whatever it may be.
So all the shows and the segments, where are all those lived on?
We film at Telemundo Studios. So we're over there, which is a really great team at Telemundo, really great videography team that we have, and we are looking at possibly shaking up the format to be a little bit more modern next year. So I won't like give anything away, but that is something that I'm in the planning stages with our team, and I'm excited about that. So.
Oh, that's awesome! Yeah. I'll make sure to when we post everything that we'll post everything to get everybody connected, just so that people can just get up to date in terms of like all the shows and segments, and then everything that you're doing community-based and organized, just to make sure everybody has like a touch point.
Yeah, absolutely.
I even love the fact that like there's more mayors coming just even to this breakfast, because it's like you need to have that fingerprint with the other communities, not just here in Indianapolis, and so they're the extension of the rest of the state for us.
Exactly, and it's so important for them to not only be heard, but like I said, to hear our voices. Like how often are they connecting with the Latinos in their community? And one of the things, like I personally, as we were confirming mayors, I'm like, do we ever have representation from like the Northwest, like from Lake County? And because what's interesting about Lake County is that it is number 2 for highest population of Latinos, right after Marion County, but it's number 1 for highest percentage of Latinos. And so Lake County is like, us being all the way in central Indiana, like they can get left out. So I personally contacted, like after we had,
have to come.
I know we needed somebody from there. So we had sent out all these invitations to email, and sometimes they respond, sometimes they don't. And I was like, no, I personally called the executive assistant for Mayor Melton of Gary. And I was like, listen, I've been reading up on him. I've read about what he's doing in the community and changes to revitalize Gary, which are so important. The fact that like graduation rates for Black and Latinos in your county are going up. I was like, I want Mayor Melton here, and I don't just want him here, I want him on the panel. And so, making sure I did my background and utilizing all these skills I have from community work, I got them to confirm.
Oh,
and so I was like,
nice.
I was like, we collectively had done a lot, but I was like, that's one that I'm personally proud of.
Like,
That I was like,
I'm going to take that one.
I'm calling that one. I want this, and I love it. So we have like representation from a county that, you know, often gets left out of things that happen here in Indianapolis, and I think that's really great.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
The expo, it's on the 7th.
Yes.
And how long does that go for?
8 a.m. to 5 p.m.
Okay.
And so we've got lots of things. We'll have some educational panels there that our education committee has put together, some health presentations. We've got a couple of bands booked. We have La Grande Radio, partners with Telemundo and Radio 1. Mm-hmm. They're going to be there, and they're going to have their DJ there. We're going to be filming an episode of VIVA, which is our show that airs during Hispanic / Latino Heritage Month. I always throw that in there. I'm like, / Latino.
Or that, or people will say now like Latinx, or
Yeah.
All the different definitions.
Yeah, which I embrace when other people want to use it. It doesn't roll off, because I speak Spanish like every day of my life, it doesn't roll off the tongue as easily for me. Latinx, I'm like, that is a Latino. But I always recognize, too, that, like, we all need to be, I respect how people want to identify. And so
true.
just like I don't want people calling me Hispanic, if somebody wants me to refer to them as Latinx, that's what I'm going to do.
There you go.
So I'm like, yeah. But yeah, so, like, we have VIVA, which airs during that time. So we'll have one of those episodes filming. So, yeah, it's going to be really exciting.
Awesome. Okay, if somebody, he's giving us the time, about 5 minutes. Thank you. I'm sorry. We just keep talking. She's just so good.
Thank you. No, you make a very welcoming environment, so that's great.
Well, my question is, because I think actually this will probably release right before the expo starts. But if like there is maybe somebody that wants to be involved with the expo, maybe they've missed the deadline, like how does that work if they say like, hey, I want to be involved, I want to be part of this community, or I want to be able to help this community? How do people go about doing that?
So go to our website, like right away. You can always email me too. It's very simple. It's Carolina@IndianaLatinoExpo.org.
Okay.
But you can go to our website, and like we have our events page there, so you'll be able to stay in the know. Like right now, like, you know, people are able to go on there and like if they want to be a vendor and have a booth, or, you know, whatever the case may be. And then when the gala is coming up, we'll have like our tickets will go live on there to be able to attend the gala.
And that's always in December?
Yes, always in December.
Perfect.
And but yeah, then we update things there regularly. Like, so there's a page dedicated to Access. So if you're interested in applying for the Access program, which will probably be going live in September.
Okay.
So that around that time is when you'll want to be looking for it. That is going to be on there. There's a wait list on there right now, but probably by the time this airs, we might have it open already.
Okay. One more question before
Yeah.
we close. If if you can have any kind of like words of advice for someone who is wanting to kind of like dig a little deeper when it comes to their ethnicity, their heritage, their ancestry, like all of that, what kind of advice would you give somebody?
Number one, don't do DNA tests. Or if you do, just please understand that they're for entertainment purposes only. They cannot tell you. That's a whole other conversation. But they cannot tell you what percentage of any ethnicity you are. They can just give you ideas of likeliness of your connections based on other people who have taken the test. The real work is in the actual genealogy and doing that paper trail. So that's important. But having conversations with your living relatives, who are still around, because even though a lot of our grandparents or aunties and uncles or tios, whatever the case may be, have had to suppress a lot of that in order to survive in this country, they still have those lived memories within them. So I always recommend like going directly to the source. I spoke with my tia on her deathbed and got so much information about my grandmother's life that was missing because my grandmother passed away when I was 14. And so things that I was missing. So those conversations with your relatives are very valuable, and familia is everything in the Latino community, so lean on it. But then I also recommend connecting with people who do know more about the culture and not learning from social media. Like make those genuine, authentic connections in order to learn about your history, but also to like kind of like figure out your own path. And then just always lean on community. I mean, I learned stuff not just from my own, you know, Mexican and indigenous community. I always joke that I can do almost any accent at this point because I'm so used to being around, you know, Dominicanos and Puerto Ricanos, Peruanos and Colombianos. Like learning from other people in the diaspora is a beautiful thing, and we should be celebrating our differences as much as we celebrate what we have in common.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Like, literally, I could keep, you're the one with telling me I have to stop talking. I don't want to stop talking. Let me keep asking more questions.
We'll definitely have to do it again.
I know. I'm doing like a part 2 because this was so good. I think, honestly, like, this is super educational. I think people are going to find this very, very interesting, and they're going to want to be able to come back to this because you just poured out so much information.
Yeah.
Like, after this comes out, I'll probably watch it myself maybe like 10 times at least.
Well, and I do consulting and keynote speeches, universities, corporations,
so
organizations.
Okay.
So you can also just email me personally, carolina.castoreno@gmail.com for if you want to book me for something or even just have, there's an event. I MC events. I do a lot. I do I do consulting for fundraising, all kinds of stuff.
That's perfect. So we'll make sure that's also in the email and the blog post that comes out with this. Yeah. So we'll get all of that in there so that people can connect with you because you're just like, you're freaking like ball of information. Jeez. All right. Well, thank you for being here. That was so good. I also want to just also say a quick special thanks to this week's episode sponsor, which is Estadio Nightclub. It is, as I said before, the prime destination spot for a Latin nightlife here in Indianapolis. You can find all the details about Estadio Nightclub at johnnettcruz.com for our latest blog posts. We'll see you next time.